Then for the mobility, now we have 350 kilometers per hour. That means that when you go in a high-speed train in Europe, you can talk on the phone and it doesn't cut. But the idea is that you will also be able to do that in the new trains that are to be developed in China, that they say that it's going to go at 500 kilometers per hour. So this is a target also for the mobility. Then, of course, spectrum efficiency and peak data rate, all these parameters are enhanced in this platform. And if you see in the right-hand side, for each application that you might think of, what is the combination of these type of capabilities that are necessary. And this is very important because these figures are targets, which means that not necessarily every network will have this performance in every aspect. Because if not, we would have very complex networks everywhere. And maybe we are in a rural area, to put an extreme example, where we don't need most of this. And then the 5G platform that will be there will be a simpler version of it, which has maybe machine-to-machine ability for these sensors that I was talking about, that monitor the environment, the agriculture, and everything that relates to the activities of this village, plus communications, plus simple applications. But in the core of a business neighborhood of a city, you will have a much more sophisticated network with much more capabilities inside. So this adaptability of the network is considered key in order for 5G to make a difference in terms of getting to the unconnected. So when we say that we need to connect the people that are not yet connected, and we try to replicate the miracle of the mobile telephony for the broadband, we have a problem in terms of who will pay for this. Well, the idea is that we will have networks that will be simple enough for them to be able to be deployed where we don't need more complex networks, and then the affordability of this connectivity will be much more adapted to the situation. So this responds to this, let's say, thought that to connect the unconnected in the developing world mainly, it will be via mobile networks and not via fixed networks. So how do we do for the mobile network to respond to that? Well, that's adaptable networks that could be simpler or more complex depending on the needs. So this is a scheme, simplified scheme of the standardization process that we are following for the IMT 2020. So as you can see in the left side, all these activities have been already done, and we are in the first blue column that is supposed to end by the end of next year. So if everything continues on time, then by the end of next year, we will have set the stage with the vision, the spectrum, and the technology views agreed. And then we would have a couple of years to define the technologies, and we would be arriving to the conference to also define the candidate bands to be globalized for this purpose. This is a more detailed timeline that is essentially the same, but you have there at the top inserted the meetings of the relevant groups in the ITU that will deal with all these issues. So you can see here how all this will lead to the final IMT 2020 specifications by 2019. So in the conference itself, the agenda item that will consider the identification of frequency bounds for the future development of IMT is the agenda item 113, as you all know by now. So every conference we change the number so nobody can learn them by heart. So for this purpose, the first preparatory meeting for the conference that was right after WRC 15 decided to establish a task group that is called 5.1 with terms of reference, and invited the study group 5 to establish this group and to nominate a chair. So this was done in the meeting that they had earlier this year. Established the group, approved the terms of reference, and elected a chairperson, which we have with us, is Cindy Cook from Canada, who will be chairing, or is chairing, this task group 5.1. So the activities to be carried out, as you can see in the left side of the slide, are relevant to many study groups, not only to study group 5. So we will deal with the terrestrial components of IMT, to look at the existing services in the adjacent bands, the protection criteria for those, and the propagation models for sharing studies. So inputs not only from the study group 5 will be received into the task group 5.1, but also from study groups 4, 5, 6, and 7, and also from 3 for the propagation, radio wave propagation schemes. So it will be a complex task with inputs from almost every study group in ITUR. And then the task group itself will conduct the sharing and compatibility studies in accordance with the resolution approved at WRC 15, and develop the draft text that will be under agenda item 113 proposed to the CPM. As you know, before the WRC 19, we will have a second CPM, a conference preparatory meeting, around 6 months before the conference, where this text is going to be considered. So you see there the time frame. So as we said, the task group met this year already and is going to meet next year 5 times. Not in 1 year, okay. Till the end of 17, I think there was like 5 times, but maybe not in 1 year, okay. Many times, and in order to develop this task, okay. So as you know, and as it was said already, WRC 15 identified bands that are, some of them are globally harmonized for IMT and for mobile services, but WRC 19 will have to identify additional ones. So here we have the list of bands that are considered, that were identified in WRC 15 in order to be studied and to be considered. So we see that we go from 24.25 gigahertz up until 86 gigahertz. So some of them already have an existing mobile allocation, but not necessarily IMT, and some of them don't have this mobile allocation. So during this period of preparatory work, the ITU will have to, the ITUR, I mean all of you, will have to identify a limited subset of these bands to be proposed to WRC 19 for consideration. Finally, we are also studying how to integrate satellite systems into IMT 2020. So, as you know, satellite system can be very important in solving some of the issues that we have to deal with in 5G. They have naturally high-speed backhaul connectivity. They have high-speed multicast enable. They can communicate directly to the home or to any place, and they have efficient backhauling of aggregated Internet of Things traffic. So it is one of the components that we are foreseeing as to help us provide this scalable solution that I was talking to you about. So when you have an isolated community or in a geographical difficult situation, maybe the satellite component of it will be the one that will help us deploy a 5G platform at that point. So this is also part of the studies that are being carried out. So in summary, IMT 2020, as we've seen, is much broader than previous generations of mobile broadband communication systems. So it provides a real platform for ubiquitous connectivity for a real digital ecosystem that encompasses people, things, processes. So, as well as, in addition to these traditional mobile broadband scenarios, we will have ultra-reliable and low-latency communications and machine-to-machine type communications. So, the work of the ITU is being done in close collaboration with all the 5G stakeholders. It is now well underway, and we expect this to be on time for WRC 19 to define the frequency bands to be used and to be one of the cornerstones, the 5G, for achieving the goals in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As you know, this agenda, differently from the previous agenda, from the Millennium Development Goals, is not for developing countries only. So this Agenda for Sustainable Development is for all countries. And 5G will play a vital role in order to be able to provide all these elements that are in this agenda, including health, education, eradication of poverty, etc. So I leave you with these links that are in the presentation that you will have there, where you can have more detailed information on all the aspects that I've just talked to you about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. And we may have time for one or two questions, if there are some questions. ITU is always so clear in the objectives. So next keynote speaker is Philippe Marnick, who is the RSPG chairman, so well known as RSPG chairman, and who is the director of the Spectrum Group in Ofcom. Philippe, the strategy for 5G?
Yep. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So as I said, I'm Philippe Marnick. I chair the RSPG. And for those of you who don't know what the RSPG does, we bring together all of Europe's spectrum authorities, together with the Commission, and look at policy, advise the Commission and others, and actually see how we can do it. So it actually brings the policy element of what's happening in spectrum. When I'm not doing that, I get to manage the UK spectrum, so it gives me something to do in the spare time. So what I'm going to talk about is 5G and how we move it forward, and what we were doing and why. Everybody in the world wants to lead in 5G. Europe, at the European Commission level, and at the Member States level, have all discussed how 5G is important and how it will deliver almost anything you can ever dream of. And in fact, unlike most other radio technologies, whatever the problem is, 5G is going to fix it. One of the challenges we therefore need to ensure is that we don't overpromise, and therefore we deliver what realistically can be done. The second for us is to make sure in Europe spectrum is not an inhibitor for the development of 5G. Because for us, it's for the industry to define what 5G will be and how it works and how it's delivered. And therefore, for us being spectrum regulators, it's making sure the spectrum is not the inhibitor and the spectrum is available to enable people to do the things they want to do, as we've seen from the slides just a minute ago. So the aim of the RSPG, therefore, was to develop a roadmap towards 5G. Focusing on the service and goals, understanding what people were talking about and how it positioned itself, but actually understanding what those were and therefore we needed to do. The challenge as well is making 5G available for all. So some of the services, and you've just heard in the previous speech, might only be suitable for high-density urban areas. But actually our populations are people in rural communities, people in the cities, people on trains, and people travelling and doing what they do. So when you look at 5G, how do you make sure that we can make it available for all? How is the system architecture and the technologies developing so therefore drives where some of the things are going on spectrum? And some of the spectrum-related challenges. So when people talked about spectrum, are they talking about the way we've allocated spectrum in the past? Are we talking about sharing? Are we talking about bits of spectrum which live in a world of license exempt, or are we talking about spectrum that's going to mobile operators? When you look at some of the applications and services people talk about, some of them are the sort of things that the mobile industry, or to a certain degree the satellite industry, have provided. They're changing, they're going faster, they're doing the normal sort of things. They're what people buy. Some of the applications are not. Some of them are motor transport systems as cars, not just entertainment to cars, but you have intelligence the transport systems delivers to the cars. Some of them, people talk about industrialization in Industry 4.0 or Industry the Next Generation, where what you have is the factories that have robots in them or the processors that are actually delivering things. So the question you have to ask yourself when you're looking at the spectrum is it spectrum for the mobile community in some areas, but how do you make the spectrum available for doing some of the industrial things that people need to do and for the other sectors that need to be there? And we need to ensure that the spectrum we're making available can be used and it's made available in ways that satisfy what the market needs to be able to deliver what it's doing. The other big thing we talk about is the question everyone asks is what frequency bands should be available. Now, if you want to be a leader, what you also need to imply that other people will follow you. It's very lonely being the leader and nobody else has come behind you. So therefore, when we've been looking at the spectrum bands in Europe, actually we're also looking at how do you facilitate global harmonization. Mobile so far, in most of its generations, we've had regional allocations of spectrum in a variety of different ways. As we go to the next generations and we put together the pioneer bands, how do we achieve global harmonization? How do we put something in place that actually enables the greatest ecosystems possible to be able to be used? How do we deliver what we need to deliver, but actually encourage it at the cost economics that we want to work? So we always have this as a priority item on the RSPG agenda. The challenge for us then became, let's expedite it. Why expedite it? Expedite it because you need to give direction to enable those people trying to do the technical work at PT1 or ITU to actually have an answer. Also why? If you look at what's happening around the world, some people are actually talking about deploying 5G systems around about 2019, 2020. The current ITU process has the answer coming out at WRC 19. What we therefore needed to do was ensure that people have a very clear line of sight for the early bands so that what's deployed in these early deployments can actually be in the bands where the people think it makes sense to do it, and actually it's likely to be the answer. And that is one of the objectives we are trying to get to and trying to see how we can facilitate it. Therefore, it's giving early opinions to both industry, the Commission and others. We undertook a public consultation over the summer. So earlier we put out some stuff that said, we think on 5G, these are the sort of areas we should concentrate on. I'll go through them in detail in a moment. We put that out to consultation and actually got quite interactive interaction from lots of players. We've taken on board the consultation responses and the team has been working away to come up with what we think the answers are for doing it, and a second, more detailed opinion will follow. Our 5G work doesn't stop, though, just because we say band A, B, and C, because the questions then become, how, working together, do we get the answer? What's the right ways of looking at how we give it to people? How do we make it work? How do we drive the nitty-gritty to actually deliver what needs to be delivered? Our opinion on RSPG said the bands 3.4 to 3.8 we thought is quite key. It's a large chunk of spectrum. It's already across Europe being harmonized for mobile for quite a long time. In mobile, there's been some usage, but not a lot of usage. How can we therefore make it available for 5G? So our first band was 3.4 to 3.8. It enables you to do coverage. It's a lot lower frequency than some of the bands people talk about, but it enables things to happen. It's also 400 megahertz of spectrum. Are there challenges in some places? Of course there are. There's people who've got fixed links. There's people who've got satellite systems. There are challenges, but those are the things we need to see how we overcome. We also need to be realistic about how you make sharing work, whether it's in dense urban areas or in the middle of nowhere. The other bit for us was, is sub-1 gig important? Now, I will debate with lots of people in the world of the future, if you need extremely high speeds, whether the UHF bands are the right answer. But actually, we're all busily in Europe clearing 700 megahertz. It's going to be made available across Europe between 2020 and 2022, give or take the odd places. It's, again, a reasonable chunk of spectrum. It's spectrum that therefore can do some of the stuff that goes longer distances, goes through buildings better, does the things that gives you the base layers to make it work. How do we enable coverage? The other challenge is we've lived in a world of technology neutrality. Therefore, how do we make sure the current mobile bands are actually enabled for 5G? How do we do the things that we need to be doing there? And then we get to the millimetric bands. Now, some people will tell us millimetric wave bands are not needed until some date in the future. Some will tell us they don't need them at all. Some will tell them everything else. I look forward to someone providing very, very great geographic coverage with millimetric waves, but they have their usefulness. I also have a question that I'll ask anybody, and I'm yet to find anyone who can give me the answer, is whether millimetric waves are required for the service or whether they're capacity, and therefore it needs to fit together. Because actually the way you think about it and the way you do it depends on how you can use them and how much of it you need. We have looked at some of the millimetric wave bands. As you saw from the draft opinion, we looked at what we call the 26 gigahertz band. We also looked at the 32 gigahertz band and the 40 gigahertz band. And each of them has their pros and cons. Each of them have incumbent users and incumbent positions in different countries. Our current positioning is tending towards the 26 gigahertz band. 26 gigahertz, why? We actually think it's a challenge in lots of member states, but it can be made available in quantities to enable it to work. Does it have other uses? Yes, there is very few bits of spectrum which are clean, almost anywhere. We also have to remember the spectrum authorities in Europe are the spectrum authorities for spectrum, not just the spectrum authorities for mobile spectrum. So therefore we do look at the interests of all the other stakeholders when we try to make these bits of spectrum work and available and do things. So 26 today is used by fixed links in many countries. Some of them, many thousands of fixed links. It's also used as one of the downlink bands for Earth observation satellites and others used by various things. So the challenges for us is now we need to make it work in a way that actually makes sufficient amounts of this spectrum available to enable 5G to work and to enable some of the other services to continue and operate in locations they need to do. We also believe that this band actually has a very good probability of being global. Some of the other bands people are talking about have less. Some people I know, and we've had some questions, say, well, if you say 26, do you really mean 28? Now, my maths is a bit bad, but 26 and 28 aren't the same numbers, and Europe's position on 28 has not changed. So we're not saying one against the other. Now, lots of other people can read lots of things, but not saying that. The other one that's been looked at a lot is 32 gigahertz. Now, 32 gigahertz, some people will have argued, is not below 30, so therefore it's okay. Everyone always has a position relative to their own angle, huh? And again, we looked at 32. There is a challenge in some parts of Asia and other places with 32 gigahertz of whether that can be realistically made available to actually make a global band. So when we're looking at pioneers, we're not saying these bands shouldn't be loose. We're saying, where should we put our effort at the beginning to actually get an answer? So that's what we're trying to get the question to. The 40 gigahertz band and others will also be attractive. We think will actually be attractive a bit later and look at those things. Also when people look at some of the higher frequencies. So for us, the idea was, how do you set the agenda? How do you set something where you can have bands, where you can make them realistically available? Where is it that we can put our efforts initially to actually get things out? Because when I look at the selection of bands for WRC, there's quite a lot. And no matter how big the regulatory bodies are, we don't all have sufficient resources to go and put all the people working on all of those things at the same time. So for us, the answer is, where do you prioritise? Where do you start? Where do you put the pioneer? Where do you get the answer? And that's what we're coming out with our views on and trying to get there. So that's where our current positioning is. We are, surprisingly, actually everybody has contributed in some way, shape or form. And we're sort of going to get all to the same answer. But this is a decision, we're talking about spectrum in European countries where people have to do things to make it available. I know there's some people around who think you wave your magic wand and everyone else gets out of the way. But actually, there's lots of work to be done, and therefore we need to make sure that everybody is with us as we do that stuff to make it delivered. So if you'd like to see our opinions on this and take a view, RSPG, spectrum.eu, everything's there. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've gained something, and I hope we can all agree on where we need to put our effort to enable us to get the answer, because that's where we need to get it to be and get it right. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot, Philippe. Do you have any question? No further mix-up between 26 and 28?
I'm very happy to answer questions if anyone's got any. No?
Okay, so thanks, Philippe. And the next speaker is, in fact, our host, Dr. Eschweiler, who is the Vice President of BNetzA, and who is the chairman in 2016 of BEREC, and he will speak about the market and competition issues in relation with 5G. Thanks a lot.
I'm very happy to see so many of you who are interested in the work of CEPT and others regarding the 5th generation of mobile communication, 5G. It clearly indicates how close the European regulators are linked to the highly dynamical development in electronic radio communications. Dear Mr. Fournier, dear Mr. Maniewicz, dear Philip as chairman of the RSPG, dear Mr. Geis, dear colleagues, good afternoon. I warmly welcome you to the Federal Network Agency premises here in Mainz. The 5G challenges may be addressed from different perspectives. The program of this workshop is proof of it, and therefore I very much appreciate to speak to you as this year's chairman of the body of the European regulatory authorities on electronic communications, BEREC. This animal is called BEREC, and I would like to present BEREC's view and expectations on 5G. 5G cannot be seen, as you all know, as standalone technological development. It is always presented as a vision and essential requirements for the digital society, and it is not limited to Europe. This is a worldwide development. The digital society, hence 5G, will change our views on connectivity. It allows not only connectivity between people, but between things. It should connect cars with infrastructure and with other cars as necessary. It should provide the necessary requirements for electronic health applications. It should initiate the 4th industrial revolution, the way products will be made. It should change the way how we get our energy and control the energy networks, and so on. There is not a single way without new innovative ideas about what 5G can do. The connection between all these new ideas is a belief of our society in the power of innovation. And I've been with the Miniport this year to the US. We have been to Boston and New York. We have had discussions with the MIT in Boston. We went to the academia, to Columbia. We went to Princeton. We went to Harvard. And then to the big players like Verizon and AT&T. And my impression is that we need more of this spirit of innovation to see more the challenges than the risks. Europe must be ready for this global competition, and I'm sure that at the end of the day 5G will be a success story for Europe. And this power can only be released in a specific regulatory environment which ensures fair competition. Ict Market Regulation was and still is a question of special competition regulation. The market players expect a reliable, stable regulatory environment which allows investment and certainty for future planning. On the other hand is the spectrum regulation, which is dedicated further to avoid harmful interference. Combined with the high dynamic of the today's telecommunications markets in terms of technology, products and services, leads to the conclusion that spectrum regulation and market regulation need to work hand in hand to create a reliable regulatory framework for 5G. BEREC is working in that direction and embraces the requirement that regulation should be predictable and future-oriented. However, there are also limits in regulation. It may be we should have a close look in the developments on some products which may have come too early on the market, but which indicate today that the role of regulation is also dedicated to consumer protection. As food for thought, I remember that not always the first player on the market was the best one. We all know by personal experience that buying the first new model of a car may not be a guarantee to get the best product, to get the best one. Innovative services like some of those we are expecting from 5G may require sometimes small areas for their development and will gain strength over time and then spread around the world. Therefore, the elements of proportionality are important to set the right environment for Europe to be successful, and success in the implementation is what matters at the end of the day. So we have to ask ourselves, does 5G require a specific regulation? This is, of course, closely linked to the question of what we can expect from 5G. What I now so far know is that there are certain constant developments in the quality of services, higher bandwidth, faster connection, faster connectivity, and more reliability. And then we have to ask ourselves, do those things need a complete change in regulation? If we look back, the existing telecom regulatory environment from 2004 handled all technologies quite well. We saw 3G, 4G, and the Internet of Things, near-field communication, Wi-Fi everywhere, rising during the last years. So one of the main elements which ensure consistency and a stable environment was technology neutrality. That is the key word in terms of spectrum regulation, which created, for example, in the field of short-range devices, a lot of competition between different applications, innovative ideas. Besides the regulator, the regulator cannot ignore the technology. 5G will make use of very small cells in very high frequency bands, and it's questionable from the point of avoiding harmful interference between other services whether the regulator should treat such spectrum use by a mobile communication system in the same way as before in lower spectrum ranges. RSPG has already identified this point, and BEREC will build its further views on this. And I think, Philip, you have been very clear on that, and you have pointed out the main issues, and from a BEREC perspective, because you are the experts, I think there is on substance, we haven't not much to add on that, what you have pointed out. Furthermore, 5G will be more than just a constant evolution in connectivity speed and new spectrum. There are upcoming questions regarding network slicing and virtualization of networks, and what does that mean for the regulatory environment? Also, this point needs careful consideration, but due to the MVNOs, it is not a complete new situation for us. More delicate questions will circle around the specific 5G applications. Autonomous driving, smart health, smart grids are some examples of new applications. Can you imagine the complete power of such applications? Networks for renewable energy require better monitoring and control, and radio will provide just one possibility to achieve that. Smart health provides also huge options for new applications. And finally, autonomous driving may change our feeling about individual travel completely. All these cases require very careful dealing around the connections and the sensitivity of the use of collected data. These questions are, of course, not spectrum related at all, but they need to be answered to preserve and to enhance competition and support of further innovation. We will all hear in the next presentation something about the views of the European institutions, and one of the pillars for 5G will be the new European regulatory framework. The European Commission has issued their ideas for a new framework in September. BEREC is currently developing its viewpoint about the proposed legal changes. I cannot go into the details at this place and at this stage,